In that last video, we left off talking about the ESCAPA words. We talked about how these 6 phrases are always going to use the subjunctive. Well, actually, I mentioned how we are always going to use the subjunctive, and then I said, I said always. Well, we're going to find out some exceptions. That's what this video is going to be, those exceptions. Now, when we are talking about these ESCAPA words, remember ESCAPA, en caso de que is the E of ESCAPA, sin que is the S of it, con tal de que is the C, antes de que, it wouldn't matter if I went with a menos que either, but either way, just a way to remember the words that go with ESCAPA, para que, and then finish it off with that last day of ESCAPA, a menos que. Those are going to require the subjunctive. Now, there are some other rules you have to know about it. Here's a big one, is when you're using para or sin as your conjunction, you have to have a change in subject. And really, I'm going to throw in antes de in here, even though it's not technically a rule. I really think it kind of follows the typical format of Spanish grammar, is that you should have a change in subject with para, sin, and antes de before you use the subjunctive. You should have a change in subject. And if you don't have a change in subject, just like we did with the infinitive, or I'm sorry, with the indicative of our, if we had will or influence, but no change in subject, we use the infinitive. That's what we're going to do here. If we don't have a change in subject, we're going to use the infinitive. So this is a good example. La abogada investigará todos los detalles del caso para defender a su cliente. Now, the subject of this sentence here is the lawyer, la abogada. She is the sentence of our first clause with the verb to investigate. And she is also the subject here. She is also the one that's defending. So since we don't have a change in subject, that's why we did para defender. And that actually should sound familiar to you. We've used that para in order to. That was when we learned the difference between por and para. Para is the in order to do something. It's always followed by an infinitive. In fact, we know whenever we use a preposition, unless there's a que in there, we'll always have to use the infinitive after it. But the rule is we're going to use the infinitive after para when we want to say, para que. We would say para que if it were a different subject, but because it's not a different subject, we just use para plus the infinitive. If I change this and said that maybe the assistant is going to investigate all the details so that the lawyer defends her client. If I had, so the assistant was the subject of this clause and then the lawyer was the subject of this clause, then I would have to use a subjunctive. Para que defienda. Para que defienda in that subordinate clause because we had a change in subject. And the same thing holds true with sin. And again, antes de, it's technically, the rule goes with, you could use either or, you could use the infinitive, or you could use the subjunctive. But I really think with antes de, just with the frequency of how often that happens, I guess it's an acceptable rule. It's just not something that's practiced very often. So I think a better option, if you want to say, like, if I'm going to wash my hands before I eat, yo me voy a lavar las manos antes de comer. I'm washing my hands, I'm eating. There's no change in subject in that sentence. So I use the infinitive. I think that's just best practices there. However, technically speaking, I could say antes de que yo coma in that subordinate clause if I want to, because I guess technically it's correct. It's just not really practiced that way. But speaking of, con tal de que and en caso de are practiced that way, where you could use either or. You could use the infinitive after con tal de, or you could use con tal de que and use a subjunctive, even if you don't have a change in subject. En caso de, same thing. You can use en caso de plus an infinitive if you don't have a change in subject, or you can use en caso de que plus a subjunctive, even if you don't have a change in subject. Now, if you have a change in subject with either of these, you have to use the subjunctive. So the antes de que thing has to happen if you have a change in subject. I want you to do the dishes before I cook. So you are going to do the dishes Now, let's say you wash the dishes. You will wash the dishes before I cook. Bueno, vas a lavar los platos. You are the subject, tú, that's the subject of that clause. Antes de, I have to use the que here, antes de que yo cocine. I'm going to use I have a change in subject. Yo is the subject of the subordinate clause. Tú was the subject of the main clause. So I have to use the subjunctive in that subordinate clause, in the adverbial clause. With the same thing is true with con tal de, en caso de, and even going back to sin and para, if you have a change of subject, you have to use the que with the subjunctive. A menos que, now this is subjunctive regardless, changing subject or not. This one's kind of easy because it's just always subjunctive. A menos que is going to be with the subjunctive if you have a change in subject or you don't have a change in subject. It has to. There's no option there. As you can see here as an example, the senator is going to lose unless she improves her image. Now, the senator is the subject of this main clause, and the one that's improving is also the senator. So unless this happens, unless the senator improves her image, that's still going to be the same subject, which normally would mean we use the infinitive. But with menos que, it's a little bit special. We're going to use the subjunctive no matter what.